Hey, folks, it's your buddy Mike Messier. I'm here. I'm in Jacksonville, Florida. My buddy is in Staten Island, Jimmy Faluca. How are you tonight, Jimmy?
How are you, sir? Pleasure to be
I,
here.
I'm doing good. It's always good to have you. We haven't talked in about a month, but this is for wrestling fans. This is kind of our Academy Awards week or our Super Bowl week, and it's wrestling week. I mean, for better or for worse or for both, the WWE is kind of the last man standing of the old territory system. And they're in the new age and they have new competition with groups like AEW and so forth. But I have to give it up. WWE is a head and shoulders above any competition in the continental United States and pretty much worldwide. Jimmy, when I say the word WrestleMania, what are some of the first thoughts that come to your head?
For me, that's a no-brainer. The first thing I think of when I think of WrestleMania is The Undertaker. And maybe that's from a biased point of view since he is my favorite. But for so many years, he meant so much to that show. And we're going to get into memories later. But my very first WrestleMania was, in fact, WrestleMania 13 in Rosemount in Chicago when he defeated Psycho Sid and became the WWF champion. That was my first WrestleMania. And while that match wasn't all that spectacular when you go back and watch it, for me to watch my guy become the heavyweight champion on the biggest stage available, it was special for me. Not to mention also earlier that same evening, you had the legendary I Quit match and probably the greatest double turn in history. So when I think of WrestleMania, I think of The Undertaker. And right after him, although this may not be a popular thing to say, after The Undertaker, I think of Hulk Hogan. Because
Sure.
for the first 9 WrestleManias, even though that last one really wasn't all that great,
Yeah.
he was the main reason WrestleMania got off the ground. I mean, what we can say about Hulk Hogan, and not all of it is good. The bottom line is he was the blasting cap for the WWF, and most specifically WrestleMania being as successful as it was because it was on the back of Hulkamania. And he's gonna, at the very least, he'll go down as at the worst top 2 because of his contributions. And when I think of Mania, I think of The Undertaker, I think of Hulk Hogan. Sometimes I think of Shawn Michaels, and also I think of Bret. I think of Bret the Hitman Hart because he had those tag matches, and then he moved up to the Intercontinental, then he moved up to the World, and then it was his final one was with Steve Austin. Those are what I think of. What do you think of?
Well, I love all of your statements, and just let me jump on yours, and then I'll get into mine. But Brett, if you look at WrestleMania 7, 8, and 9, I could be wrong, but I think Brett went from a tag team title loss with the Anvil, and I think they lost to the Nasty Boys at 7. Then at 8, he regained the Intercontinental title for reign number 2 over Piper in a babyface versus babyface match. And then at WrestleMania 9, of course, he lost the world title to Yoko, and then Hogan and then everything. So it's just interesting that you mentioned Brett, and he has like this nice little arc of going from tag team guy to intercontinental guy to world heavyweight title guy. And then at 10, if you take it to 10, he's right back in the mix, getting the title back from
in the main
Yoko.
event. So if you really if you were going to play in one of those wrestling games, create a wrestler, you win the tag titles with a trusted partner. Then you move on and you move into the singles. You win that middle card title. Then you win the world title. And don't forget, somewhere in between, he also won King of the Ring. So, like you said accurately, Brett has a real nice progression. I mean, in a lot of ways, I say all the time, Brett is easily a top 10 guy for me because his ability to tell a story with his wrestling, his ability to work with anybody. I would point to anyone that questions his ability to do that to look at King of the Ring 93 when he wrestled Razor Ramon, Scott Hall, God rest his soul, Mr. Perfect, God rest his soul, and Bam Bam Bigelow, God rest his soul. I'm sad to say. But all 3 of those guys worked 3 different styles, and all 3 matches were great. And who's the common denominator? Bret the Hitman Hart.
Yeah, and it's interesting with something like WrestleMania. You asked me what I think of, and it's interesting. I was thinking about WrestleMania today. I went back and watched on Peacock the WWE kind of made a hype piece for themselves 12 or 15 years ago, the true story of WrestleMania. And it's, of course, because they made it themselves, it's very pro Vince, it's very pro WWE. The portion that I watched, which was most of it, they never give a tip of the hat to or the NWA and Starrcade. I mean, I'd like to say, as a old territory fan, there was 2 Starrcades in the books before they did any WrestleManias, and in fact, people make a big deal about Muhammad Ali, and rightfully so, being a special guest referee for WrestleMania 1. Well, Joe Frazier, Smoking Joe, Ali's nemesis, was a special guest referee at Starrcade 84.
Blair and
Basically,
Dusty.
yeah, basically 5 months before. And there's a lot of times when, and like I said, as an old territory fan, I get a little defensive when WWE doesn't always tip the hat, because they did bite, as the kids say. They took from other groups. For instance, WrestleMania 2, which I actually enjoy, and I can defend WrestleMania 2.
I've
They
never
did.
seen it in its entirety, actually.
It's interesting if you find, I believe, not YouTube, but what's that other it's something like Go Vision. There's another
Daily
website from,
Motion.
yeah, Daily Motion has the uncensored, uncut stream that you can dig up on Daily Motion for WrestleMania 2 from like when people saw it through the closed circuit, right? So the WWE Peacock version is all cleaned up and everything. They had a lot of technical glitches that aired in live time that the WWE cleaned up,
Because it was in
for
3
our
different cities in the same night.
right. But here's the thing. They bit that from NWA. Starrcade 85, which was in November of 85, WrestleMania 2 is in April of 86. Starrcade 85 did Greensboro Coliseum, where you had Magnum TA versus Tully Blanchard, the I Quit Steel Cage match.
One of
And
my
you had,
favorite matches ever.
yeah, a blood brawl. Yeah. And then in Atlanta, you had Dusty Rhodes challenging Ric Flair for the world title. And they did a thing where the whole night in both 85 and 86, they did the exact same thing in Greensboro, Atlanta. They'd have like a match or 2 in one venue, shoot over to the other venue. Right. They didn't have all the matches in one spot and then go over to the other spot. I think they went back and forth. I could be wrong on that. But the point is, one thing that WWE has done quite well is they'll take somebody else's idea and they'll improve upon it, right? So
without tipping the hat.
And exactly, and the thing is, they won. I mean, they Jim Crockett Promotions is out of business, and the remains of WCW, what became WCW, Vince bought it. So you could think they could tip the hat because they've already won. You know what I mean?
It doesn't take much to do that. And honestly, what that does by doing that is it shows that you're an honest company.
Right.
That's really what it does. If anything, it puts them in an even better light that, hey, listen, we won the war, but we have no shame in admitting, yeah, the idea came from that. But what's better, innovating an idea or bringing out the best version of it? I mean, I guess you could look at it from 2 different perspectives. Here's a question for you, buddy. You think we ever see that again?
I think this is what I've been thinking. I don't know if they would do 3 locations in one night. I think this
What
is a big
about
positive.
2?
I think 2 locations over 2 nights. The first night's from New York, the second night's from LA, the first night's from Orlando,
I
the
see what
second
you're
night's
saying.
yeah. You could do a thing where
that I could see them doing. Although I could tell you this, having their crew split, they're going to feel it that weekend. They'll feel it that weekend.
let me bring this to the table with WWE especially, and I think they've kind of put the kibosh, at least for the last couple of years, I could be wrong, on some of this NXT global expansion. They were going to do an NXT Japan and NXT Europe. I think some of that's been
talk about that.
I think they reined it in during the pandemic because it just got to be too much. So now they're just channeling everybody to Full Sail University and Orlando. But my thought is, if they wanted to add a third night to WrestleMania, you could just have an NXT WrestleMania night on Friday.
Have an NXT takeover event,
right? But you could call it NXT WrestleMania. I mean,
they could if they wanted to. And
they could.
I don't know if you've been paying attention. I mean, I haven't been watching their shows live, but I read what's going on, and they have quite a hot hand with one of their top feuds with Carmelo Hayes and Trick Williams. They were a tag team. They were united, and then as usually happens in pro wrestling, one partner betrays the other. But both guys, first of all, they look great, they speak well, and they work well. They both had NXT championship matches with the current champion Dragunov,
Right.
and both matches were good, like really good. And I haven't sat and watched NXT in a while because, as we discussed previously, I kind of got tired of getting behind these guys, seeing them get called up, and then Vince gets his hands on them and just doesn't know what to do with them because he doesn't understand them.
Right.
But these guys are actually really good, and I'm like, okay, now that maybe the guys of Vince is not there anymore, maybe these guys have an opportunity to succeed, because what you would see is you would see guys get over on NXT doing certain things, and then they would come up to the main roster, and then those things would be completely absent, which to me is exceptionally counterproductive, because why wouldn't you use what got the guy over to begin with? You know?
Yeah. I think what we're going to hear more and more with the shoot interviews and stuff like that is a trickle of revelations from people that, leave the company or get fired or whatever, of really horrible Vince stories of basically the last 4, 5, 6 years, Vince Jr. losing his mind and still having the position of power. And if you look back at, the Stephanie playing the in and out game and all that stuff. So I think you could be onto something. And just on the NXT thing for just a second, I do go to these NXT house shows. Oddly enough, I go to the NXT house shows, but I don't watch the weekly programs. And it's just interesting to see the fans, especially young families, like people with kids and stuff, and they're chanting, "Whoop that trick, whoop that trick." And I feel like saying, hey, folks, do you realize that when you say "whoop that trick," it's basically a reference to Hustle and Flow, where it's about a pimp slapping around a slapping around a prostitute. But I mean,
Jesus.
don't let me stop everybody from having a good time.
No.
But
They all say it. They all say it when the music hits. Like every single person, from kids to adults. But let's not let the facts get in the way of a good time, right, Mike?
Yeah, exactly. Let's bring the kids.
But
chant "whoop that trick" in Orlando.
just as a little aside, Mikey is aware that as a wrestling fan, I am also a cosplayer. I build costumes and I go to conventions, and I've met wrestlers. I recently just met Paul White, the Big Show.
Yep.
He was a total gentleman. My sister came to the same convention with me, and she actually met the late, great Bray Wyatt's widow, JoJo. And while we were in line, she waited in line with me because the line was long. She drew a portrait of Paul. And when it was my turn to go up to meet him, she stepped off because she didn't have a ticket.
Right.
I go up to him. I say hello to him. He guessed I was a Taker fan because I was dressed as Taker. And I handed him the portrait. I said, I just wanted to give this to you as a gift. My sister, who's with me, she met someone else earlier. She drew this portrait of you. You would think that I handed this guy something out of Fort Knox. He said, "You just made this?" When I was done with him, he told my sister, "You get over here right now." Took a picture with her, made her day completely. Just a total gentle giant, a funny guy. He's got a great sense of humor. But why do I bring this up?
Sure.
I'm going to give my dear friend Mikey a little hint as to what my next project is.
Oh yeah. Yep. That's the lantern, the Bray
That's
Wyatt
a legit
lantern.
oil lantern, so I have to fix an LED light to it.
Nice.
Me and 3 other people, we're going this year to New York Comic Con as the Wyatt family.
So you got a Brody, you got a Luke
I have
Harper.
a Brody, I have a Rowan, and I have a Strowman.
Nice, very nice.
It's gonna be fun. And I actually have a little mini speaker that's gonna hang off of my pants. That's gonna be playing the original Wyatt family theme song as we walk through the entire convention.
That's great.
It's the way I figure it is.
Sure.
The best way to pay tribute to the man and to the crew is to represent them. And Mike Rotundo goes to a lot of those conventions. He was there last year with DiBiase. If I ever had the pleasure of getting to meet him, it would be an honor to shake his hand. Because even though I would shake his hand not only to offer my condolences, but to recognize him for the great work he did, not just in the first WrestleMania teaming with Barry Windham against Nikolai and the Iron Sheik, but Mike Rotundo, even when he was in the varsity club, was a damn good worker. It was him. It was Rick Steiner, and I believe it was also Kevin Sullivan, right?
Kevin Sullivan was the games master. He was like the coach.
Yeah.
And Rotundo was the top.
Captain Mike Rotundo.
Right. Captain Mike was like the leader of the guys, and Steiner was the tag along who became a
Comedy
babyface.
guy.
And then and they kind of brought in Steve Dr. Death Williams, which was the catalyst
Son
for
of a bitch.
yeah, Rick Steiner left because of Williams, and they did bring in Dan Spivey for a cup of coffee too.
Really? Spivey was in the crew?
Yeah, for about a month.
I think it was right after that the Skyscrapers formed.
Yeah, it was
Teddy Long and Sid Vicious.
If you want to see Dan Spivey as a member of the varsity club, he's on the undercard with him and Kevin Sullivan against Eddie Gilbert and Rick Steiner. I think was actually the last match of the Wrestle War 89 pay-per-view where Flair beat Steamboat to regain the title. Flair and Steamboat didn't go on last
that was
because
in Nashville, right?
In Nashville. And so you had the Oak Ridge Boys do a terribly long concert on that show, which I'm guessing would not be on Peacock because of the copyrighted music. But the actual pay-per-view ended with Rick Steiner and Eddie Gilbert as baby faces defending the U.S. Tag Team titles against Sullivan and Danny Spivey. And yeah, that did happen.
For anyone that's watching, sometimes Mikey and I get into these tangents on the NWA because we just, as much as we are fans of the old school WWF, we also appreciated what the NWA brought to the table, which was great wrestling, great characters, long-term storytelling. Anyone that was watching those shows, and I unfortunately wasn't alive for some of them, but I made it my business to watch them. So I've seen all three matches that Flair and Steamboat had in '89, which were groundbreaking. I saw the matches with Ric Flair and Terry Funk, which were groundbreaking. I even had the pleasure of getting to watch the first Starrcade. I've seen it in its entirety, including the main event, which was the steel cage match with Harley Race versus Ric Flair, and I think Gene Kiniski was the referee.
Yeah, one of the worst referee jobs of all time. Gene Kiniski kind of went out of his way to put himself over as the referee and so forth. Let's get back to our topic of WrestleMania, Jimmy. Sure. So you said that your first WrestleMania was 13. I will say this: the first WrestleMania I watched in live time was going back to WrestleMania 3, and this was on pay-per-view, and this was really exciting. This, from my memory, was really like only the second thing ever my family ordered on pay-per-view. I think the first thing was Ferris Bueller's Day Off as a movie. Okay. And to basically be in this suburban house, and it's basically me and my parents while they were still together. The three of us are watching WrestleMania, and it's basically a 4-hour show from the Pontiac Silverdome. Aesthetically, one of the best things about that show, Jimmy, is you can see day goes into night. And it's a really cool effect when the opening match, I think, was the Can-Am connection of Rick Martel and Tom Zank against Don Morocco and Bob Orton. And it basically feels like daylight. Then as you get to the halfway point of the show, the last match before intermission is Piper versus Adonis and the haircut match. And then like the darkness is settling in, like the sun is setting, right? And by the time you get to Savage and Steamboat and the Killer Bees and Hacksaw Duggan and that second half of the show, and they Jimmy, they had a 15-minute intermission during the pay-per-view too. Yeah. They actually had a clock on the TV screen that ran for 15 minutes. Yeah.
I only know this because I have the entire show on VHS because my dad recorded it when it was happening, and I still have that tape. I have that one and WrestleMania 4 all on VHS happening in real time. So nice. I know exactly what you're talking about. But WrestleMania 3 was very pivotal because it was the biggest venue the WWF had done at that time.
Yes.
And the main event was either going to make or break Hulk Hogan. And that was all up to the boss. And I'm not talking about Vince McMahon.
Right.
I'm talking about 7'4", 525 Andre the Giant. Andre, I don't think some of these younger kids understand. When I have discussions about the biggest draws in the history of wrestling, I mention Hogan, of course. I mention Austin, of course. I mention The Rock, of course. But I also put Andre on that level because every single place Andre performed in front of, especially in his heyday, sold out. Why? To see the Giant. Because he was the biggest attraction wrestling had seen until Hulk Hogan. But Andre was a spectacular attraction that drew money everywhere he went. I don't think people quite understand just how big of a deal it was because unlike the Big Show, God bless him, he's a great person, great wrestler, but you saw Big Show all the time. When Andre was coming, it was a big deal because you didn't see Andre all the time.
Yeah, and the reason for that is because Andre was kind of booked like a touring NWA World Champion, where they would send Andre to World Class to tag team with Kerry Von Erich or Iceman Parsons against the Super Destroyers one night, and then he'd be back in New York to wrestle Big John Studd, and then he'd be in Mid South to wrestle Kamala. And when I was first as a young fan, Jimmy, I remember reading the wrestling magazines, the Apter magazines, the Pro Wrestling Illustrated,
And all that.
yeah, and there was always pictures of basically three people, three or four. It would be like Harley Race, Ric Flair. They were kind of going back as NWA World Champion, back and forth. Dusty Rhodes and Andre the Giant were like these touring wrestlers that, but I was also a WWF fan because that's what was on TV in Northern Virginia. So it seemed like Andre was always there. But then I'm reading the magazine, and Andre's in Texas wrestling the Super Destroyers. Andre's wrestling Kamala in the middle of the Mid South, and he's in a
cage match. Yes,
he's in a cage match. He's wrestling in a battle royal in Minneapolis.
Andre was everywhere. Andre had his hands in every market because he was smart enough to know, I go there, it's going to be a sellout. So it's and the way, based on what Jim Cornette said in an old interview, the way Vince McMahon Sr. used to work was, let's say, for example, and I'm taking this straight from the interview, let's say that a territory in Tennessee, his top heel was Waldo Von Erich. If Vince Sr. wanted Waldo Von Erich, he was going to get Waldo Von Erich because in New York, you could make more money. So he would call them and say, listen, I'm going to need Waldo to start TV September 20th. Can you make him available for me? All right, Vince, no problem. Thank you very much. I'm going to give you an extra week of dates on Andre. And then there's a week of sellouts in the territory. So you worked as a unit.
Right.
You didn't just rip away all the talent. You took who you needed to get a hot heel, but then you sent someone there so that way their territory stayed hot. Your territory's hot. Now everyone's making money.
That would be
it used to work.
Yeah, that would be Vince Sr. That would be Vince McMahon Sr.
Yeah, not his son.
No, we know that. So
old horn dog.
And it's Vince McMahon Jr. is just a guy that he's so embedded into our lives, whether we like it or not. Because if you're a wrestling fan,
you know who Vince is.
You know who Vince is, and it's just an interesting thing. But talking about some of these character arcs at Mania, Andre the Giant has an interesting character arc. His first WrestleMania against Big John Studd, it's kind of like finally putting some end to this never-ending feud with Big John Studd, the Body Slam Challenge match. Okay, so Andre kind of wins that, and he's not even in the top match or even the second match of the card. That's Hogan and Mr. T and Wendy Richter and Leilani Kai. And then you go to WrestleMania 2, and it kind of feels like WrestleMania 2, Jimmy, the whole battle royal in Chicago with the football players and the wrestlers, and I don't know if you know this, but Bruno Sammartino and Pedro Morales are actually in that WrestleMania 2 battle royal with the football players. Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
I thought Bruno was gone.
Bruno actually wrestled one WrestleMania match. He wrestled at WrestleMania 2 Battle Royal. Him and Pedro Morales are in this thing. And
wow.
So then Andre wins that Battle Royal. Interestingly enough, the last guy that he eliminated
was Bret the Hitman Hart.
Bret the Hitman Hart.
He threw him right onto Jim Neidhart.
Right. So another little seed, of WrestleMania futures is planted with Bret Hart there. And then Andre gets to WrestleMania 3, and it's like, okay, now it's the time for this torch to be passed. Here is one thing that, as a fan at the time that can still remember this stuff, for a couple of years, there was always this thing with WWF called the big lie, that every year they had to tell you some huge lie and get away with it. So for WrestleMania 3, the big lie, well, I'll give you first the big lie at WrestleMania 1. In the promotion leading up to it, it was, you got to come see this event at closed circuit television, because if you don't watch it on closed circuit TV, you'll never see any of these matches ever. They'll never be on cable television. They'll never be on network television. You have to come the day of the event, March 31st, 1985, find a closed circuit.
It's your only chance to see these matches. That was the hook.
That was the hook. And basically, by that summer, the whole thing was on VHS videotape for everybody to enjoy. So WrestleMania.
What was the big lie for WrestleMania 2?
I'm trying to remember what the 2 was. That's a good one.
Then let's just get into the lie for 3. Bigger, better, badder.
The lie for 3 was Hulk Hogan, for the very first time, Hulk Hogan will be wrestling Andre the Giant for the WWF World Title.
Which they wrestled in Shea Stadium and plenty of other times.
Right.
So here's himself has alluded to that for like 3 years, Andre just kicked his ass every time they wrestled.
Yeah. So basically, the way that they worded the sentence is you kind of had an out clause, because you say they could claim, hey, we're just saying they've never wrestled for the WWF World Title before. But in some circumstances, it seemed pretty clear that they were alluding that these two guys have never wrestled each other, period, which they had done, as you said, all over the place. There was a little faux pas at WrestleMania 4, by the way, where the WWF magazine was on the newsstands 2 or 3 days before WrestleMania took place. And they had Randy Savage on the cover of the magazine listed as the new WWF World Heavyweight Champion, Macho Man Randy Savage. And this is, the magazine's on the newsstands 2 or 3 days before WrestleMania 4 takes place. So
WrestleMania 4 is one of my favorites, and it's for a very selfish reason. It was the Macho Man show, because Macho had 4 different matches, and while they weren't all spectacular, how could you not get behind that guy? It's
right.
To me, Savage, I don't know where you stand with this, but I was having a conversation with a very dear friend of mine not too long ago, and we both agreed Savage was the perfect, he was the most complete pro wrestler ever. And my argument for that is this. You need him to be a heel, he could be a heel. You need him to be a babyface, he could do it. You need him to be technical, he could do it. You need him to do aerial tactics, he could do it. You need him to talk, he could do it. There was nothing Savage couldn't. And the most important, you need him to draw money, Savage will draw money. So Savage could do it all. There was nothing Savage couldn't do. And when the bell rang, to me at that time, the only guy that was on his level as far as putting on good matches was Ric Flair.
Right.
I'm talking in the 80s.
Yeah.
Savage, Flair, Steamboat, that group of guys, Savage was up there with them as far as I'm concerned. And I don't care that his match with Steamboat was rehearsed. They executed everything when the bell rang perfectly.
Well, if you take a look at those 3 guys, basically you have Steamboat and Savage at WrestleMania 3, Flair and Steamboat with all their WCW, NWA pay-per-view matches.
89, yes.
And then you have Savage and Flair. They headlined pay-per-view.
WrestleMania 8.
Right, WrestleMania 8.
And me was one of the best matches I ever saw. Like, if I ever did a top 10 greatest WWF title matches, that Savage Flair match is on it. Like, I never get tired of that match, and everything about it, whether it's Flair wearing the red, which alluded to the fact that he was gonna get color that night, or whether it's Savage wearing the black and gold, looking badass and everything, and how Savage, I don't know what it is about Savage, but he always made you believe he wanted to murder the guy he was in the ring with, whether it was Jake the Snake, whether it was Ric Flair, whether it was Hulk Hogan, he made you believe he hated that guy. You felt it. And that just speaks to Savage's skill as a professional. And their match at WrestleMania 8, I don't know who thought that putting them on before Sid and Hogan was a smart idea, because let me tell you something. As big of a star as Hogan was, That match with Sid completely shit the bed. Completely shit the bed. They should have closed that night out with Savage and Flair. The title should have been the main event. And if we're going to really break it down to brass tacks, the main event of WrestleMania 8 should have been Ric Flair versus Hulk Hogan. I don't know who made that decision to completely deviate from that. Because if you remember, after Flair won the Rumble, there was a press conference to decide who the number one challenger was, and Jack Tunney named Hulk Hogan. And the truth of the matter is, as much as I prefer Savage to Hogan, that was the match to do. Because it was the biggest star of the NWA, the biggest star of the WWF, the biggest prize available, the biggest stage available. How do you not do it?
I've heard the story a few different ways, and I will actually give them a little bit of an out because Hogan was going to take some time off. The whole big steroid thing that was burgeoning, right? Hogan wanted to go on ice for a while, wanted to go on the shelf for a while. So they couldn't exactly have Hogan come in and beat Flair for the title and then have Hogan go away. And then it's like, are you going to have Flair beat Hogan? Because if you do that, that's basically saying, yeah, the smart fans, the Meltzer fans are right that the NWA's best guy is better than our best guy.
Let's say I go along with your line of thinking. Then if Hogan knew he was going to go away, then the main event still should have been Savage and Flair. Because
right.
If Hulk's going to go away, the last image should be your WWF champion who's going to be wrestling the next day. But that's neither here nor there.
I'll say this. Let me just finish on that one. Sometimes when they have like the title match or a big match halfway through the show, it doesn't bother me so much because I kind of feel that Flair and Savage, the crowd might have peaked with them. And by the time you get around to Hogan and Sid after watching the Bushwhackers in an 8-man tag team match with the Repo Man or the Beverly Brothers, by the time you get around to that stuff, the crowd's half dead anyway.
Well,
so
I understand that perspective, and they're not necessarily wrong. You're not necessarily wrong. The only thing I'm trying to put forth is I believe Savage and Flair deserved that respect of you're headlining. You're in that spot. You're in that marquee spot. You earned it. You belong there because, he's been in the news. But what was CM Punk's biggest gripe?
That he never main evented.
Got the honor of main eventing WrestleMania. Did he wrestle The Undertaker? Yeah, he did. In the middle of the card. Did he wrestle for the WWE title? Yeah, he did. In the middle of the card. He wanted to have that marquee spot so that he could become a bigger draw. Because when that spotlight is put on you, if you're good, you become a draw. If you're not, the spotlight's put on you and it dims away. You want proof? Look at The Miz. He main evented one WrestleMania, never again. Why? Because he didn't belong. You want an example of someone that really doesn't belong in that main event spot? The Miz is a great example because he got the main event of WrestleMania and not a single F was given. None. So the reason I say that Flair and Savage deserve to go on last while the crowd may have been tired, I think that Savage, for all his years, deserved to have that honor, and he also deserved to get that main event payout because you know as well as I do, the guys that go on last make the most money. And
Good
Savage
point.
deserved that Hogan payout. That's just me speaking as a Savage fan, so there is definitely bias there.
Well, let me go with this Savage thing for a second because once again with these arcs, if you take a look at Savage, WrestleMania 2, he defends against George Steele in New York. Basically comes out with the title. By the way, Randy Savage beat George Steele, I believe, in a total of 4 Saturday Night's main events. Four times Savage had
his day was a big, and George Steele in his day was a big deal. He was having WWF title matches with Bruno.
Right. So for Savage to beat this guy 4 times on worldwide television is great. Then WrestleMania 3, of course, the match with Steamboat where he loses the IC, but that kind of just frees him up to turn babyface. WrestleMania 4 is his crowning achievement, wins the title in that tournament. And then WrestleMania 5, they finish
the
Mega Powers Explode. He finishes the title reign. WrestleMania 6, he's kind of demoted a little bit. He's
The
kind of in the
Macho
gimmick.
King.
The Macho King, that was a lot of fun. If it had just been Randy Savage one-on-one with the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes,
That would have been just fine.
yeah,
Who
they
wouldn't have wanted to see that?
right. And to be honest, I love Sherry Martel as a wrestler and a performer. So her being with Macho Man, I dug that, and her being in that tag match. But Sweet Sapphire, no offense, but she was just way in over her head. And that was actually how they brought Miss Elizabeth back. They brought Miss
Yes.
Elizabeth back in. And then if you continue this arc, WrestleMania 7, he loses this retirement match to the Ultimate Warrior. And he goes back to babyface. He gets his girl back. He gets Miss Elizabeth back. And then after being put on the shelf because of the retirement match, eventually Jake the Snake and all that good stuff, and he's
That's one of
brought
my
back.
favorite feuds of all time.
Right.
Jake and Macho. And I told Jake that to his face. I said, when you smacked Elizabeth and you had Gene Okerlund screaming and yelling at you, Jake started laughing. He looks at me and says, when you can fool the boys, you know you got
And it's too bad that Savage and Jake didn't line up to have a WrestleMania match. But
No, that should have been like a steel cage match at Mania, like a loser leaves town match, because the feud was intense enough to warrant that. It's not like, oh, it's March, let's bring down the cage. No, these two have such a heated rivalry, whether it's Jake crashing their wedding, the snake biting Savage, Jake smacking Elizabeth. Hello, this was tailor made, even though it was 5 years too early. That feud was tailor made for Hell in the Cell. Those
right.
two
Oh yeah.
hated each other so badly that they did such terrible things. Well, Jake did terrible things to Savage, and the feud, they definitely should have had a Mania match. But the reason the feud was cut short was because Savage's in-laws legitimately believed that Jake hit Elizabeth, and Savage did nothing about it.
That's
These
hilarious.
are the times we were in, folks. Savage
Yeah.
had to end the feud prematurely to save his marriage, which, unfortunately, that didn't happen.
Didn't work.
Nope, didn't work.
And then you got Savage, basically WrestleMania 9. I think he just
He
did
was on
commentary.
commentary,
Right. And
sadly.
then WrestleMania 10, he
Had a
has that
weird
match
match
with
with Crush. Very
Crush.
weird.
Right. So kind of my point is, it's kind of interesting, Jimmy, and maybe this is another episode, but Vince McMahon has kind of this weird thing with certain wrestlers. And I've said this before, where if a wrestler gets to be too popular or too established, they kind of cut the legs out from under them.
Oh, listen, we could sit here all day and talk about, we should have a whole episode just talking about that very subject, because, and the only reason I say that is because I asked this question: how many stars in the last 15 to 20 years have we missed out on because of that type of intentional sabotage? And there's really no other way to describe it, Mikey. It's
Yeah.
intentional sabotage. I held up the lantern earlier. Bray was a victim of that. We mentioned him earlier. Punk was a victim of that. We can get into so many guys. But yeah, Savage, for some strange reason, Vince wanted to keep him on the sidelines, but Savage still had that vigor to still go. And clearly, when he went to WCW, he had great matches with Flair. He had that legendary feud with Diamond Dallas Page. So
Right.
clearly he had more to contribute.
Yeah, he had a whole second half or like even overtime career in WCW.
And I
But
think he felt insulted when Vince tried to sideline him.
yeah, he did. He didn't want to be put out to pasture quite yet, and rightfully so. And luckily for him, there was a place called WCW that was looking for him, and
And
he did
I
great
don't know if
things.
you're aware of this, but he went to Vince with a 2-year plan to retire. He went to him with a plan to wrestle Shawn Michaels at WrestleManias 9 and 10. He would defeat him at the first one, and at WrestleMania 10, Savage says, "I'll put him over and I'll retire." And Vince said no. But it's a good thing he did, because at WrestleMania 10, we got that legendary ladder match with Razor Ramon and Shawn Michaels. And as much as I would have loved to have seen a match between Shawn Michaels and the Macho Man Randy Savage, could you imagine what that match would have looked like?
Yeah, that would have been
Holy
great.
mother of God. That would have been
Yeah.
great. I don't know if I would have been willing to sacrifice that ladder match, though, because that Razor and Shawn match was, yeah, it was that good. To
Yeah, it
me,
was. No,
to
it
me,
was. It
although
was.
the
It was
best match
great.
that night was Owen and Brett, in my book. That show peaked with the first match.
Yeah, WrestleMania 10 is an interesting one. That was the first WrestleMania since 3, actually 8, that I didn't get to see in live time, but I saw quickly thereafter. Let me
But
ask
no
you,
Undertaker on that show.
yeah, WrestleMania 10, no Undertaker, yeah, because he was selling the injury to Yokozuna.
He was selling that he had to take a ride in the casket.
Let me ask you this, Jimmy. As far as like when and where you've watched WrestleManias, is it traditionally been with friends, family?
It's
What
been
are
different since I was a kid. Well, my first WrestleMania was with my father. That was my first WrestleMania. My second WrestleMania was WrestleMania 14. It was with both my father and my sister because at that time she had become a fan. WrestleMania 15, I really don't remember. WrestleMania 2000 was by myself. I watched it by myself. Matter of fact, if I remember correctly, WrestleMania 2000, there was a show called WrestleMania All Day Long where they chronicled all the WrestleManias.
yeah,
And
yeah.
my parents at that time, they decided to get that. I didn't even know that it was even going to be on. My father said, listen, do not touch that VCR. I'm recording something for you. And it was WrestleMania All Day Long, and it was awesome. WrestleMania 17, I watched with my friend Steve, who
Okay.
I used to live next door with them. When Stone Cold Steve Austin turned and joined with Vince, both of us were like, what did we just see?
Right.
I hated it. I hated it because I did not like seeing Stone Cold with Vince. I felt like that was something that should have never happened. And JR put it perfectly. It's like turning John Wayne into a Nazi general. Who's going to buy it?
Right.
WrestleMania 18, I watched in my basement. WrestleMania 19, I don't remember. WrestleMania 20, me and my sister watched that together because that was a special WrestleMania for me because that was when the biker died and the dead man rose. And when I heard Paul Bear's voice over the loudspeaker, Mikey, let me tell you something. I don't lose my shit often. Pardon my French, folks.
Right.
But when I heard that, oh, yes, I lost it. Because as a child, I watched these two come out every week. Tombstone, put them in a body bag, carry them off into the darkness. That was my escape. So when I saw Paul, I said, are we going to see the gray gloves? Are we going to see the boot covers? Are we going to see? I was hoping to see the old Undertaker stuff, but we got a nice rendition of the modern Taker mixed in with the new, which was fine.
Right.
I was happy to see, as much as I hate what he turned into, I was very happy at the time to see Benoit get his moment. It's a shame
Right.
I can never watch that and feel the same, especially after I became a parent. I get a sinking feeling whenever I see Benoit because it just makes me sick. WrestleMania 21 was with my sister again. 22 I watched alone. 23 I watched with my best friend at the time. One of my best friends at the time. Her name is Ashley. She now lives in Florida. Because she was a big John Cena fan, and she and I used to butt heads about that all the time. That was a good WrestleMania. WrestleMania 24, I watched by myself. 25 was the first time I watched it with a crew.
Okay.
Because my dear friend Joe, who I love and adore, the reason for that, not just because he's a great person, he was the bridge between me and my wife. So because of him, I have
Sure.
what I have, which is what I value most. But
Right.
our two favorites were clashing, which was his favorite is Shawn, mine's Taker. So, and then we watched the match, and it was the incredible match that it was. Unfortunately for that show, it was the only match on the show that I actually gave a shit about. 26 was kind of the same. It was all of us together. And from
Right.
that point forward, I watched every WrestleMania with the crew. The only WrestleMania I didn't watch with the crew was 31 because I was rebelling that year because I wanted to see Daniel Bryan versus Brock Lesnar because Bryan was the most over guy they had. And I desperately wanted to see Taker and Sting. And I was getting neither. I think my hashtag back then was "fuck the fans." That was the message. We know you want Taker and Sting. You're not getting it. We know you want Bryan. You're not getting it. And that was the beginning of the Roman push. And ever since that, gradually, I started watching less and less and less. I watched 32. It stunk. I watched 33 with my best friend Chris and my friend Joe. And after Roman got the pin on Taker, they ran out of my place because they knew I was not happy.
Was the
34,
32
did not 34, I did not watch.
okay?
35, I did not watch.
Ever?
I watched the pandemic WrestleMania because we were all stuck indoors. So I said, you know what? If this is going to be Taker's last match, let me check it out. Then I watched the year after, the first 2-night WrestleMania. And when I saw The Fiend get beat by Randy Orton in 5 minutes, and what makes me angry is I was cosplayed as The Fiend. I have the whole deal. I was ecstatic for him to finally get a big WrestleMania moment in front of people. And he gets beaten 5 minutes. We were all deflated. And I wasn't going to have anyone leave because I had a crew there. And then I saw Roman stack Edge and Daniel Bryan. That was my last image of WrestleMania. I have not watched WrestleMania in 3 years.
Wow.
And it's going to continue. I'm not watching this weekend. I'm working. And for one very simple reason. I do not trust them. And this is where we can kind of transition. I do not trust them to do the right thing. What is the right thing? The right thing is, and I want this established from Jump Street, I am not a fan of Cody Rhodes.
Okay.
And the reason I'm not a fan of his is because back in 2016, he got into a back and forth with a YouTuber that I've been following for years. And he made the statement that WWE doesn't sabotage wrestlers. Right. And I was like, huh? Ask Bray Wyatt how that works. Ask CM Punk how that works. Ask Zack Ryder how that works.
Ask Stardust how that works.
Yeah, I was about to say, look at yourself. Because
Right.
he said to my friend, Vince didn't see world champ in me, but that's not holding me back. Of course it is.
Right.
He didn't see world champion in you. So it didn't matter what you did. You were never going to be the world champion. And I think that's still going to hold through. Because as much as many people may hate Ryback, one thing he is right about, this is an exceptionally petty, let me stress that word, petty company. And it is still run by people that learned under Vince, Triple H, Michael Hayes, who's no longer the free bird he used to be, Bruce Pritchard, who has always had his head up Vince's rear end. It basically lives there.
Yeah.
I don't trust them. There are 2 things that I think should be set in stone for WrestleMania. 2 things. That's it. Number 1, LA Knight should be beating AJ Styles. AJ Styles gains absolutely nothing from beating an up-and-coming star who's already 41 years old. Right. So time is of the essence with him. So you're coming off a year where LA Knight spent about 6 months selling more merch than anybody else.
Yep.
He loses to Roman Reigns, not even featured at Survivor Series, loses at the Royal Rumble, loses in the Elimination Chamber. Last I checked, AJ Styles is a multi-time world heavyweight champion. He's won multiple championships everywhere he's been. He is at the end. So, looking at this from a pure booking perspective, who do you give the victory to? The guy that the people are getting behind and they're spending money on, or the guy who's on his way out? That, to me, is a no-brainer. And I say this as a guy who's been a fan of AJ Styles since 2005, when I saw his X Division title match with Samoa Joe at Turning Point 2005. That's how long I've been watching AJ. I'm the guy that said AJ should have beat The Undertaker when they fought in the Boneyard match. So think about how highly I think of AJ. There's no way he should be beating a LA Knight because he's a rising star and he's got potential to be more. And because he's already 41, you don't want to waste time. You don't want to possibly circumvent his momentum more than you already have. Because every podcaster I listen to says his reactions are not what they were 6 months ago. Well, of course, you fed him to Roman.
Right.
You easily could have
Twice.
ended exactly. You easily could have ended that match in a double disqualification. You don't beat Roman, but you don't beat your rising star. And the second thing that absolutely should be happening, and I want to hammer this home, Cody should be walking out as the WWE champion, having pinned Roman Reigns 100% clean. No excuses, no bullshit, no slipping on a banana peel. He beats him straight up. And I say this for two reasons. Number one, you beat him last year for
Right.
no reason. So everyone that's mad that the quote unquote Cody crybabies stopped the Roman versus Rock match, no, you stopped the Roman versus Rock match because had you put Cody over last year, guess what? You'd have been free and clear to have your match. But because you've been telling the story of Cody's redemption, the fans have been following it. They're actually buying into it. They bought into it so much that they booed the fucking Rock. They
Right.
booed the Rock. And I have a very dear friend who I went to grade school with. He's the biggest Rock fan I know, next to my best friend Christian. Matter of fact, they're also friends. And he can't understand why people like Cody. He can't understand how they could want Cody over the Rock. So I'm going to put this very simple. The Rock is a megastar. The Rock is easily a Mount Rushmore professional wrestler. I don't like him, but I have no shame in admitting that. His impact is what it is. Can we agree?
Sure. Of course.
Okay. Is there any doubt in anyone's mind that The Rock was there only to lose to Roman? Did he even have a 1% chance of beating Roman Reigns as the champion?
I don't think so. I mean, I think they probably would have had, unless they were going to do a thing where Rock got the title at Mania and Roman got it back at SummerSlam or something like that. But I think most likely if Rock and Roman had taken place this year at Mania, it would have been a 10 to 20-minute match and Roman would have pinned him and then they would have hugged or something like that.
That's exactly. So if you're a fan of The Rock, you should be ecstatic because guess what? Without the quote unquote Cody crybabies, you don't get Final Boss Rock. That character never takes shape. And I got news for you. More than likely, The Rock is pinning Cody in that tag match. More than likely, that is probably what's going to happen. So, if you're a fan of The Rock, your guy just went from having a surefire loss to a Samoan who, quite frankly, is not on his level. No matter how Roman could hold the belt another 5 years. He's not The
Right.
Rock. He's not The Rock. No matter how much they force and shove and cram, he's not.
Yeah.
He's not. He never will be. And the reason for that is because they do record business whether he's there or not. Survivor Series did the biggest gate in the history of their company, and he wasn't on the card. So The Rock went from a surefire loss to possibly getting a big win. So if Cody loses again, which is very likely,
Right.
he's done. Like as a top babyface, you could forget it. You're basically, you know the old saying, killing the territory?
Yep.
You're killing your top babyface if you do that. Because he lost last year, spent the whole year trying to get back, wins the Rumble, gives up his shot willingly,
Right.
and he looks so bad when he did that. Like, he's very fortunate that the backlash was what it was. Cody's very fortunate because if it wasn't, people would have never taken him seriously at that level again. You know as well as I do that in pro wrestling, perception is reality.
Right.
And Cody's perception was that of you just willingly gave up your spot because this guy's a much bigger star than you, but he's still going to lose.
You just handed your
You
balls to this
basically
guy.
you got a lottery ticket and you handed
Right.
it to a billionaire.
Yeah. So
That made him look so bad, and because of the backlash, it breathed new life into him. But if memory serves me correctly, he's now gotten his rear end handed to him by The Rock 2 straight weeks. And now
yes.
he's heading into WrestleMania I feel bad for the people that actually think he's winning. I don't buy it. One of two things is going to happen. And you could take it to the bank. He's either going to lose or he's going to win because of someone.
Right.
That's what I believe. Now, Mikey, I ask you one question and you can take the floor. Am I wrong for not trusting them?
You're not wrong for not trusting them. They've proven, and well, here's the thing, and I'll actually take the devil's advocate and defend the WWE on this one. Here is their chance. Now, I don't know if this is the first or second show that, in theory at least, is 100% Vince McMahon free, right? Vince McMahon Jr. free.
Yep.
If you've got a new group, Nick Khan, Triple H, The Rock, and whoever else, maybe Heyman, whoever else, are in charge of actually deciding who wins and loses, and if Cody's going to get the belt or Roman's going to keep it, this is their chance to make a statement. And there used to be a thing in wrestling that if there was ever a title, even a regional title that got held up, like the Mid-South title or something like that, and this is kind of why Razor Ramon got the Intercontinental title over Dean Douglas back in 95. The default is you go to a baby face after a vacant title because that makes the fans happy. So even though it's like kind of simplistic thinking, like, okay, we screwed the fans out of Shawn Michaels versus Dean Douglas, but we'll put the belt on Razor. Everybody's kind of happy. I feel like that the WWE 2024 Vince McMahon, Janelle Grant lawsuit up in the air. You've got all these new faces in control, like The Rock, like Nick Khan. In theory, at least, Vince-free decision-making. The default might be, let's have a baby face mania. Let's put that nice shiny belt on Cody. And I do believe at one point the plan was for Roman to beat Bruno's record. I'm leaning towards thinking that they're going to change that and put the belt on Cody. And I'm leaning that if they do something like have Sami Zayn beat Gunther, then that would be another case of these are feel-good match results. WrestleMania 2000 that you mentioned earlier, WrestleMania 16 or WrestleMania 2000, where Triple H won the Four Corners match over Mick Foley, the Big Show, and the Rock. That show really ended on a sour note. That was the first time a heel had won a match at Mania in the main event in maybe ever, right?
Unless you count Yokozuna and Brett, but most don't because Hogan walked out with it. But
right.
I get what you're saying.
Yeah, they'd always ended on a baby face with the title walking out of there, one way or the other. So when you think of WrestleMania 2000's kind of overlooked, I thought it was actually kind of entertaining, but it ends on a sour note. And I think that with all this stuff, all the headlines, good and bad, the transition, the merger with TKO, now's not the time to put the fans on another year-long adventure with Cody trying to find himself. And he already did that. He did that with Lesnar, 3 matches, all this other stuff that he did. Now is the time for him to win that title.
War Games.
Right. He's got to win that title or Jimmy Faluca is correct. They've emasculated him and they've ruined him. We've only got about a minute left, buddy, but I want to get to these questions real quick. We'll have to, and actually this brings me, my buddy Carl actually attended WrestleMania 22. That's one of my favorite WrestleManias. I was going to say real quick, my favorite WrestleMania is 22, 17, and 3. I'll go with those. And this is our buddy AJ. He likes that they're getting to edgier stuff like the whipping. Happy birthday to Carl on Thursday. Congratulations. Carl's in the shadows of Chicago. Like I said, he was there for Cena Triple H, WrestleMania 22. This is what I wanted to talk to you about, and we're going to have to do another show. I got to wrap this up in like 30 seconds, buddy. But I want you to watch this Bray Wyatt doc if you haven't already. It just came out on April 1st.
I haven't, but I intend to do so.
Let's both watch it at some point over the next week or so, and then we'll do another show and we'll analyze it. And as a Bray Wyatt aficionado and a family, person who cares about him as a personal level, I'm really interested in that. We got to wrap this things up, buddy, but MikeMessier.com, One Pro Wrestling and Sports Fan YouTube channel, Jimmy in Staten Island, Mike in Jacksonville. Jimmy, last words. 10 seconds, buddy.
I look forward to our next episode.
Thank you, Jimmy. All right, everybody. We'll see you next time. Please share the URL. Good night.